I hear some of you getting quiet. Excellent. So hello and welcome to OPB Stop Requested Live in partnership with Portland State University. I want to thank you all for being here tonight. I'm Jennifer Dill. I'm Director of the Transportation Research and Education Center here at Portland State, also known as TREC. For those of you who may not be familiar, whoops, I need to go one more, who may not be familiar with TREC, we're an interdisciplinary center working to make transportation more accessible for all. Through research partnerships, student mentorship, and professional training, we help create sustainable and inclusive mobility solutions, both locally and across the country. You can connect with TREC by following us on social media and subscribing to our newsletter using the QR code. Wait. See, I knew I should look. Okay, using this QR code here on the screen. Okay, I'm going to pause for a moment in case you need it. And then I'm going to tell you that next Thursday, May 15th, I hope you'll join us over at Smith Memorial Student Union for a conversation about transportation finance with former Congressman Earl Blumenauer. He'll speak about some of the barriers and solutions to funding our transportation system, quite relevant for tonight's conversation. He'll be drawing from his over 50 years of experience at all levels of government. So with that, I'd like to introduce Prakruti Bhatt from OPB.
Hi. Okay. Thank you so much for coming to the Stop Requested live event, which is being held here at Lincoln Hall in partnership with TREC. Before we start, we want to thank all of our OPB members who ensure the critical reporting and inspiring programs you rely on are here for you and for everyone in our community. We would also like to thank our wonderful volunteers for coming out and helping make this all happen. So a big round of applause for them as well. We have a survey for you for this event tonight. If you can scan the QR code that's on screen or on one of the pamphlets you've been given, you can complete a 5-minute survey that helps us provide events like this. Take the survey and you might even win a big gift basket of OPB merchandise from us. It's a win-win situation. And without further ado, I would like to welcome OPB President and CEO Rachel Smolkin.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm Rachel Smolkin, the president and CEO of OPB. It is great to be with you. I am so excited that we're going to talk about Stop Requested because it is one of my favorite series that we've done at OPB. I've been at OPB almost 8 months. I'm coming up on 8 months. So I'm now calling myself the new-ish president and CEO. One of the first series I got to experience at OPB was this one. Our mission at OPB is to connect audiences and communities around the state, around Oregon and into Southwest Washington, and what could do that better than literally riding buses? So that is where we started, and we're gonna tell you so much more about that, and to do that, I will introduce the host of this series, along with Prakruti, Lillian Karabaic, host of OPB's Weekend Edition, and a journalist focused on transit, hence the buses, as well as healthcare and economics. For Stop Requested, Lillian spent 2 weeks riding 38 buses, 3 trains, and 1 patrol car. That is going to take more explanation, Lillian. We will all look forward to that. This was not the first time Lillian spent quality time on buses. She has ridden transit in 51 countries and always planning another trip to get more vegan donuts, she tells me. She came up with this idea. We were talking the other day, and I said, so tell me where this bus idea came from. And she said, well, I used to input bus schedules into trip planners in Google Maps and Apple Transit, and always wondered about those places and how hard is it to get to John Day on a bus, and the weekly bus to Christmas Valley, who rides them, what are they like? How did they decide to go by bus? And so that is what sparked the idea for this series, which clearly has been simmering for a long time before she got to it. And she gave us a fun fact. She went from Dublin, Ireland to Shanghai, China entirely by public transit over 30 days. I did not even know that was possible, so I learned something new today. I can't wait for you to see Lillian in action. Prakriti and Lillian are two of our most enthusiastic people individually at OPB. When you put them together, that is a really magical combination of enthusiasm. So with no further ado, Lillian, over to you. I forgot to tell you she's also a figure skater, but now you all saw that on display.
I just felt like I should follow the enthusiasm with that. I feel like enthusiasm is a bit of a euphemism, but I will take it. It's probably accurate. Hi, everybody. You're listening to OPB's Weekend Edition. I'm Lillian Karabaic. Top headlines are in 4 minutes. Okay. I accidentally forgot where I was. You're actually here at Lincoln Hall, and we are going to talk about Stop Requested. So the whole reason I decided to do this event, and I reached out to Dr. Jennifer Dill and to TREC, was because I am a true transit nerd, which you might have figured out from that introduction. And one of the things that my editor didn't quite let me get into this series was the rampant transit nerdery. Who's here, so, and she'd be like, yes, that's interesting to some people. And so I said, we will find those people, and we will put them in a room, and that's why we're here. So I am truly going to mire you in some transit nerdery right from the top, and it will all get easier to understand as we go on, I promise. But like Rachel mentioned, I used to help put transit routes into computers. So there is a thing called General Transit Feed Specification, which is an open data standard to make bus schedules readable by computers. It's what's behind Apple Maps, Transit Maps. Pretty much, if you open, does anybody have a TriMet app on their phone? Underlying that is General Transit Feed Specification, or GTFS, which was actually developed here in Portland. It was originally called Google Transit Feed Specification, and it was Google and TriMet working together. And what is so cool about it is the democratization of transit information. All of this is completely open source. This is what the files that underlie what you look at. So this right here in the middle, that is all of TriMet's routes. That is just a CSV file that you would open in Excel or the Notes app, and that contains all of the information on our transit system. Really tiny, little, lightweight, much smaller than would fit in a Nokia cell phone as far as size. And that all can, with combination of a couple other files, which you can see on the side there, equals information that you'll see on Google Maps. So this is a nearby stop. Some of you may have come here today on it. This is the PSU Southwest 5th stop. And you can see all of the upcoming arrivals on the Max Orange line. And that stop is represented right below there in that blue line that I've highlighted. And that's all that underlies what works as far as transit data. And one of the cool parts of my old job was, it was a lot of looking at this, which you can imagine is not the most thrilling thing in the world. I watched a lot of House Hunters International while I, reformatted Excel spreadsheets. But here is the thing. The coolest part of that job is I got to work with hundreds of transit agencies all across the world, and primarily rural and suburban transit agencies in the US. And one of the coolest parts about that job is I got to work with almost every transit agency in Oregon. And sometimes we would have to do really bananas things to try to figure out where the bus is going. And there's a couple of my former coworkers here, so you all know sometimes you would call up dispatch and it would be like the person that's the comptroller for a small town who also, as far as I can tell, makes the bus schedule on the back of a napkin and then it gets faxed somewhere. I mean, really, there are a lot of buses that are just kind of wandering around the small towns of America, picking people up. And I always was like, oh, I want to know more about these buses because I'd spent, let me tell you, a whole lot of time on Google Earth looking for what would possibly be a bus stop in small towns. And so one of the agencies that I was always really curious about was this Christmas Valley bus. It is like, one, Christmas Valley, interesting. I don't know if you've ever been there, not a lot in Christmas Valley. It was originally an investment scam, but that is for a different podcast. Correct. So I had this idea of like, what if I tried to ride all of these really small agencies years ago? And then when I started working at OPB, one of the things you have to do as a radio host every hour is say, you're listening to OPB, KOPB FM Portland, KOAB FM Bend, KRBM FM Pendleton, KOBK FM Baker City. Everybody's like, this is a little bit too much like listening to the radio. This is a crucial time for federal funding for public broadcasting. But one of the cool parts about that is that you start thinking, like I was always taught this trick of actually think of the place. And I was like, well, the only place on that list I haven't been to is Lakeview, which it turns out there was a reason I'd never been to Lakeview before. It's not easy to get to. I made a massive spreadsheet trying to figure this out. I'd, at this point, kind of recruited Proc Rudy because I said, hey, do you want to do something crazy with me? And she said, sure. And I was like, I didn't even tell you what it is. She's like, I'm down. So I dug up, I just started Googling, like, how to get to Lakeview public transit bus. I had this recollection that there was a bus service in Lake County from when I worked at Optibus, and so I was like, surely there's something. And I found like a PDF that had been uploaded in 1998 to some website that was like, call this number. So I called.
Hi Lillian, this is Linda calling from Lakeview Transportation. I'm excited to get with you to find out how we can get you from there to here and off again.
So Linda Mickle, God bless her, she answered my call while I was like, hey, I can figure out how to get to Bly, which is about 60 miles outside of Lakeview. I can find, there's a bus that goes to Bly. Can you get me from Bly to Lakeview? They have no fixed route transit in Lakeview, but for a really small agency with 3 part-time drivers, they do 50,000 miles a month. And that is because Lakeview is 100 miles from the nearest anything. And you know, if you want most medical services, you have to go to Klamath Falls, which is, if you've been to Klamath Falls, it's not like a hoppin' big town. It's very nice, everybody's very sweet, beautiful, picturesque, but that is a bustling metropolis compared to Lakeview. And so people have to drive 100 miles to get, you know, groceries at the cheaper store. If they want to get, like, there's no dollar store anymore in Lakeview. If you need medical services, like there's a lot of core basic things. There's no hospice care in Lakeview anymore. So if you have family members that are, you know, want to spend their last days in Lakeview, they can't anymore. You have to drive 100 miles each way to go visit them in Klamath Falls, which isn't very practical for working people. So Linda Mickle, after she ascertained when I called her up and being like, can you get me from Bly to Lakeview? She figured out that I was not stranded on the road in the side of Bly looking for a ride. And she was like, we'll figure it out. We'll figure out how to get you there. And this is that PDF that I found online. By the way, Lakeview also operates the Christmas Valley once-a-week shopper bus, which I have to tell you, GTFS was built by TriMet, so it's built by an urban agency. It really is not great at understanding that a bus might run only once a week or once every other week. And it is not really built for rural transit. You have to kind of figure out how to fit it in there. So it's not terribly important that you need to know this, what exactly this is, but it essentially just says, call us. We'll figure out how to get you where you want to go. And Linda Mickle sits in the old morgue in the basement of the old Lakeview Hospital with a spreadsheet, and she figures out everything on a giant spreadsheet about how to get everybody where they need to go. And we made it to Lakeview, where every single sign is a guy waving a gun at you.
Yeah, Lakeview, you'll be surprised. It's in the middle of nowhere.
That's our bus driver, Larry, who drives for Lake County Cloud. And how we ended up getting into Lakeview is that she told us, hey, just go to this warehouse in Klamath Falls. We got lost in a parking lot, little scared, ended up in the back of a mattress store, eventually found the food bank. The Klamath Lake County's food bank does all of their warehousing out of there. And there's a great deal of need in Lake County. There's an aging population that has a lot of food insecurity. And so she said twice a month, we send the bus out there and they pick up food. And all you have to do is show up at this warehouse and Larry will pick you up with a bunch of food, which is exactly how we get there. This was the eventual route that we worked out. I went through I think I had 7 different tabs on the spreadsheet. And I had a really solid plan for how we were going to get into John Day. And then they canceled the John Day bus that ran once a month. So my entire schedule was entirely contingent on this John Day to Burns run that ended up being canceled. And I had to reroute the entire trip, I think about 2 months out. And that really shows you how important it is to be able to be flexible when it comes to these rural transit services, because they are extremely reliant on funding, and they are never going to break records for ridership, right? I think they told me they had approximately 4 people in the past year ride that Burns route. I'm wondering who the approximate 4th person was, but... So this is James, who was a rider on the Sunset Empire Transit District bus, which was an agency that actually went through a bunch of budget shortfalls and stopped operating for about 3 months in 2023. They are now back up, but James used to not have a car. He lives in Astoria, and he was, he said for him, the bus is community.
Kind of just a huge spiritual experience, getting to really get outside myself and chat with people. I live by myself, so I really liked that sense of community, and it's absolutely the hands down best place to get the best gossip. Everybody on the bus 100% knows what's going on, what's going down.
And this is kind of the first thing that I want urban folks to take away from rural transportation. Yes, they are never going to break ridership records. They are never going to break frequency records, but there isn't these third spaces in a lot of rural towns anymore, especially as a lot of churches and faith communities have closed. The third space is often the town square is the bus. I mean, we even had a town crier on one of the buses that would inform every single person on the Lincoln City bus. Did you hear so-and-so passed away? Did you hear so-and-so moved away? I mean, every single person that got on the bus. And these are the community spaces. And this is a thing that I hear a lot of the time from people who live in urban areas about public transit, is that they don't want to be on they like it in theory, but they don't want to be on public transit because it involves the public. And I think this is the best thing that I took away from a lot of these smaller buses. They are really a community in and of themselves. This is how they check in with everyone, especially in a lot of these kind of aging communities that their family has moved away because there's not a lot of economic opportunity in these rural areas. They're retired and they don't have a lot of mobility anymore. This weekly trip for a lot of the people that go from Christmas Valley into Lapine to get their groceries, that's their social network. That's their community. And it is really important to remember how much place can facilitate community. And that is what the bus is for a lot of these people, because if the bus only runs once a week, everybody's gonna be there, right? So this is Kathy Gunderson, who moved out to the coast to Depot Bay a couple years ago. And she gave up her car because she realized the transit was good enough on the coast that she didn't need to. She said she kind of lives like she's in the old stagecoach days because she doesn't have laundry in her apartment, so she does her like once a week trip into the laundromat and gets all her supplies and looks at the seals on the beach. But the main reason that she did it was originally economic, like it's a lot cheaper to not own a car, but she also said as she's gotten older, driving is just really scary out there.
126 is kind of scary because the curves and this and that, and everybody wants to go fast, and I'm getting older now and I don't want to go fast. So it was very relaxing riding it, mostly.
I think this is one of the really key things to understand about mobility when it comes to older populations. A lot of people that were once drivers are going to stop being drivers. And if they don't feel like they have appropriate options for getting around and getting their basic medical needs and their grocery needs met, they're going to keep driving long past the point where it medically makes sense for them to do it. I think we all know someone in our life that maybe should not be driving anymore. But if you live in a place where it is impossible to do any of the basic services, if you live in a healthcare desert, which most of rural Oregon does, then you are going to keep driving if you don't feel like you have good public transportation options. But because she lives in the Northwest Connector corridor, which means she has about 6 different transit agencies that all work together in that area, she can get inland from Lincoln City to go to Albany. She was actually headed out on, the reason she has a suitcase, she was headed out on like a long Amtrak trip because she's retired and she can do that. And that, like, it is really important to think about that kind of social connection, but also the practicality that comes. If you make a functional transit system for older adults, they are going to be able to age in place longer. They're going to be able to stay with their families longer. So this is the LeGrand Transit Hub, and this is actually not from Stop Requested. This is from a piece I just had come out, I think this morning, about the Statewide Transportation Improvement Fund, which is up for debate right now in the legislature. But, you know, one of the criticisms a lot of the time are, like, generally, rural transit is subsidized by big cities. I think there's a lot of people that don't realize it, but, like, cities give more to rural transit than rural transit gives back. There's a lot of legislators who kind of view transit as an urban issue. They're like, that's just TriMet, that's just the big cities, that's just Portland. And, you know, one of the things Patrick Heeman, who is the Union County Transit Manager in LeGrand for CCNO, he said, any lawmakers that don't believe that rural transit is a rural issue should just come ride a loop with them.
I don't think people understand how many people rely on public transportation, whether it be low-income individuals, the elderly, or people just who can't drive to get to the grocery store, to get to medical appointments. It's so important to them. That is the only way they can get to the places they need to go to live their life. And if you have a car, you don't see people needing the services we provide.
And this is Kane, who works for Wallowa Union and Baker counties for CCNO. I think the thing he really wanted to emphasize to folks is that this is healthcare services. So many of these rides are paratransit or healthcare rides, but paratransit essentially means that they are picking you up and taking you to a hospital or a medical appointment. Almost all of Lakeview's, Lake County's rides are paratransit, right? They're mostly driving people to doctor's appointments. My driver said his longest day on the road was 23.5 hours because he had to take someone up to Portland. And she had 5 doctor's appointments in Portland because if it takes that long to get to your medical providers, you're gonna do them all on one day. And you know, they have to leave to get to Portland for a 9 a.m. appointment. They have to leave Lakeview at 3 in the morning. And they have a lot of veterans in Lake County. There's a lot of people that, as Linda put it, went there to kind of disappear because there's not a lot out there, and now need Veterans Administration services. They have to go up to Medford from Lakeview, which is hours and hours of riding in order to just get a basic blood draw from the VA clinic. If they need chemo, they pretty much almost always need to come to Portland. There's no OBGYNs anywhere in the southern part of the state now. So if you are on Oregon Health Plan and you need medical transport and you are pregnant, you've got to go hundreds of miles to get basic services. And it's not just about convenience. These are essential services for people, but the main thing that having fixed route transit or deviated route transit like they have in LeGrand is it gives people this independence, right? You need to book paratransit 72 hours in advance in most of these places at a minimum. You can't really plan your life around that in the same way that you can if you know that even if it's every 2 hours. I know it's like, if you're a city transit user, you're like, every 2 hours is not a frequent run bus. But every 2 hours you can plan your life around, right?
It's not about just convenience. We're talking, the one dialysis clinic that we have is in LeGrand. And, we have people from Enterprise, people from Baker, have to be able to access this one facility.
So one of the things that happens to people as they deal with disabilities and they used to be drivers is a lot of them want to stay where they're at. Jeff Poppy here, who was not someone I was interviewing for Stop Requested, I just happened to be at a coffee shop in LeGrand and was like, oh yeah, I'm riding transit around the state. And he's like, hey, I'm legally blind and I live in LeGrand and I'm on the transit board. But he said, like, I've always been here. I am a fixture here in LeGrand. I don't want to move. But so I have to take the bus. And for him, it was the isolation, the loss of independence. He's a horseman, and so he used to be able to just drive to Pendleton to go to an auction. He used to very easily kind of move around. And for him, that loss of independence really was very hard for himself. And when I asked everybody that I interviewed that was on transit, like, what would you do if you had an unlimited budget for public transit in your town? And he was like, well, I'd hire a driver full time. And I was like, well, what if you want to improve it for other people? And he's like, I'd hire them all drivers too. And I feel like that's a real example of, like, if you only ever have been presented with the option that getting places by car and driver is the only practical way to do it, you are never going to think about the possibilities for good transit. But the other reason I'm going to bring this up, LeGrand, for the size of its town, has a pretty phenomenal, it has a 2-loop transit system. However,
Never on time. So you're standing there, whether it's snowing or raining, and you might be standing there for 15 minutes.
it's never on time. And one of the things that Jeff Poppy had to deal with as a legally blind user is it is a route that kind of just, like I said, there's buses just wandering around America. And it wanders on this loop. He's lived there his whole life, so he knows his way around LeGrand. But you have to figure out where that bus is. Rudy and I are not inexperienced transit users, all right? And we were like, I don't know when the bus is coming and from which direction it's coming from. And what's worse, I used to put this transit system into Google Maps. Like, I have looked on Google Maps for these bus stops before, and they're quite well signed, but if you don't know the area, it's really hard to know. Like, and I wasn't able to judge distances on this kind of hard to use map where I was like, okay, I have to have a mobile phone, I have to have enough data to do this, and when the bus is here, I don't know if that's 10 minutes or 30 minutes away. And Jeff had the same problem. He knows the routes, but he can't see the dot relative to it. There's no voice activation or anything like that. If you don't put your data in a standard format where it can be read by a screen reader, which a lot of smaller transit agencies do not, they kind of rely on this real-time data, well, it's really, really hard for your visually impaired riders to be able to see it. And that's exactly what Jeff had to deal with. He also can't see the bus when it's approaching, and I think he would venture to say this, he is a proud guy. He does not want to, I was like, well, in Portland, they'll give you like a little stick that you can, do to like raise your hand so the bus can see you. And he's like, oh, I would never do that. I wouldn't want people to know. But he's like, but I know all the bus drivers. They just know that if I'm squinting at the side of the road, I'm waiting for the bus. So when it comes to all of these buses that are kind of just wandering around, I have come up with sort of this theory of transit. So does everybody know the fast, cheap, good theory? So you can have two sides of this triangle, but you can't have all three, right? So if something is fast and good, it's not going to be cheap. If something is cheap and fast, probably isn't going to be very good quality. The transit version of this, frequent, flexible, and cheap. So a lot of these agencies are totally free. They're supported by grants and that statewide transportation improvement fund that I mentioned and federal grants. So they're free. They will not be frequent. And they are probably going to be flexible. So a great example would be Christmas Valley. That's a once-a-week bus. It shows up at the same time-ish every Wednesday. And you make it to the center of Christmas Valley, and she'll take you the 40 miles into Lapine, and you do all your errands. And I have to say, Debbie Warren, the bus driver on that bus, she's been driving it for 16 years. She's a Silver Lake resident herself, which is close to Christmas Valley. And she just like pivots. She's like a symphony director. She like, everybody just tells her what their errands are. She just writes them down by hand. And then she like figures out, okay, we're gonna drop him off at his pharmacist, and then we're gonna drop her off at the bank, and then we're gonna come back around after his tests are done, and then we're gonna pick her up after she ate a cookie after her blood draw, and then we're gonna go to the thrift store. I mean, like, she just figures this out all in her head. We cannot put Debbie Warren's head in Google Transit, right? Like, that's not gonna happen. It's not gonna be punctual. She's like, we try to head back to town around 1. It's like, this is a great bus if you have the ability to spend all day Wednesday doing errands in Lapine. Not going to make sense for people that have like a 9-to-5 job. And it's very flexible. It's cheap, it's free, but it isn't frequent. It comes every Wednesday, hopefully, as long as 4 people agree to ride it. Now, if you have frequent and flexible service, it's not going to be cheap. That's something like Uber or Lyft. When I was chatting with the Community Connections of Northeast Oregon, I was like, hey, can you guys open the Uber or Lyft app for me and tell me if you have any drivers? When we got off the train at 11 p.m. in Klamath Falls, Brock Rudy's like, oh, we'll just call a Lyft. And I was like, oh, honey. And then we went up to someone at the station, because the train only comes twice a day. So you'd think that like if there were drivers in that town, they would be there. And he's like, we have a taxi. It's taking someone else now, but you can wait. It'll come back. And so Patrick opened up the Uber app and he said, it says we have 1 person that's driving. It says. I wouldn't trust that they would show up because I know them. But I mean, that's the curse of like, one of the things that they said for us, the people that were riding with us from Enterprise back to LeGrand, that's a 3 times a week bus. It's $5 each way. Price hasn't changed in 16 years. I gotta tell you, Steven, who was on the bus with us, big fan of that. And that's 60 miles each way. You can't reasonably like have a Uber or a Lyft for 60 miles. If you could find a driver, it's not gonna be cheap. Now, if you have cheap and frequent service, it wouldn't be flexible. That would be a high-frequency bus. It's not going to deviate 2 miles off your route like a lot of these buses will and pick you up at your house, right? Like, if it's cheap and it's frequent, it's definitely not going to be flexible. Riders will plan their lives around infrequent bus. I think that's one of the things that people don't think about if you're used to frequent headways. Especially in a small town, if the bus only comes once a week, like it does in Christmas Valley, if it comes 3 times a week, like it does in Enterprise, riders will plan their lives around it, even if they have cars. Both the people that were riding back from Enterprise into LeGrand with us had cars, but they're like, $5 is a lot cheaper than gas to go 60 miles. But you have to be predictable. And this is one of the like key elements here. You have to be able to you have to know what day it is. You have to have the town crier go around and tell everybody, on Wednesdays, Debbie's gonna pick you up. Like, we were just picked up in a parking lot in Christmas Valley, right? I think the really big thing to understand here is that, and one of the reasons I love transit, is that this intersects with so many other things. Transit is just this lens to view all of these other issues that are happening in rural America. It's happening right now with the addiction crisis. A lot of people are taking these buses in order to get to addiction treatment facilities because there are none. There's whole counties in the state that have not a single mental health care provider. And people need to travel sometimes 3-4 hours in order just to get there, if they are on medically assisted recovery, if they want to get dialysis, if they are on dialysis, they have to travel sometimes 2 or 3 hours 4 times a week in order to go to a dialysis clinic. Even if they're doing home dialysis because they live in a rural area, you have to pick up the supplies once a week, right? There are so many ways in which this intersects with healthcare. This intersects with housing. One of the things that I thought was really interesting, Tillamook, every agency is dealing with driver shortages. A lot of drivers are older, as you may have kind of noticed if you listen to the series, and a lot of them retired during COVID. They were like, I'm done. And they have had a lot of trouble recruiting new drivers. And one of the problems in Tillamook is that they can't recruit from outside Tillamook. They do not pay enough for people to move to Tillamook to afford housing. Same problem is true in John Day, which is 2-3 hours from Bend, like the fastest growing metropolitan area in our state. But John Day doesn't have any housing that's affordable for drivers. So many of these drivers are doing it part-time to supplement their retirement income. And there's just that's one of the big reasons that a lot of people are taking transit is they're living in like their childhood home because they can't find affordable housing in the metropolitan areas that they work, and they take transit to and from their jobs. This was Linda Mickle when I asked, what do you guys do? Like, why are you necessary here? And she just said, there's no taxis. There is no taxi that will come to Lakeview. You could not pay them enough. And so they're highly, highly reliant in Lake County on these federal grants and the state grants that they get, because remember what I said about fast, flexible, or cheap. Everything is flexible there. It's all a individual ride scheduled into town, and it's free to the rider. But if they had to pay, it would be hundreds of dollars in order to be able to get that. So this is Christmas Valley. Gives you an idea of the vibes on that bus. They called it the senior party bus. That's it. That's all I'm going to read this slide. Christmas Valley's once-a-week bus takes riders to get food boxes, groceries, complete bank errands, and to medical appointments. The closest medical facility is 60 miles away in Lapine. This is Debbie Warren, the bus driver that I said, who's a symphony director.
North County is a good place to live. I've lived there 28 years, but there are drawbacks, because major shopping is a long ways away. Doctor's appointments are a long ways away, but there's peace and quiet. You can see the antelope play,
Debbie also said that she forgot to buy something when she was on her grocery run in Lapine for a dish that she wanted, to buy those little like frozen rolls that you get at the grocery store to make some sort of dish she wanted to make for church. She forgot to do it. It was 3 times the price at the one tiny market in Christmas Valley because she forgot to buy it in Lapine. And grocery costs were like a through line for everyone. So this is Stephen Rogers, who I mentioned. He has a car, and he's lived in Wallowa County for a really long time, but he loves this bus, and he likes to tell everybody possible in Enterprise that this is a great thing. He also really wanted to let me know he does not believe in Greater Idaho, and he does not want to join Idaho. We heard that a lot, and I was like, is it because we're from Oregon Public Broadcasting you're telling me this when I don't ask you about it? But, he said there's no way that the price of gas would be in any way equivalent to this. So, almost done, and we're going to bring my old boss up here to talk to me. One of the best parts about this that you wouldn't have heard in this series is the amazing listener voicemails that I got. And so many of the phone messages that I got from people that listen to this series were from people that have limited vision or are legally blind, and they had no idea they could go to so many places by bus. And, a quarter of the state cannot drive. A quarter of Oregonians are non-drivers. It's even higher in rural areas because we have an aging population in rural counties. And one of the things that a lot of people that are non-drivers say that they really struggle with is that loss of independence. The ability to just pick up and say, I'm gonna go to the beach, right? Like, I don't have a car, and I'm like, oh, it's a whole operation to go to the beach. But if you don't even know these buses exist, how are you gonna do it, right? So this is from one of the listeners. I almost teared up when I heard this one.
My husband has very low vision and very limited vision. So I, of course, have to do all the driving, which means that I don't really get to see as much as I want to. And I just kind of had hoped that maybe it would be possible for us to do some sightseeing by bus. And your program just gave me the hope that, yeah, I might be able to do that.
Here's the thing, transit is economic development. I put this over Wallowa Lake because Wallowa Lake is extremely dependent on tourism. That whole region is very, like, their economy is pretty much built on tourism at this point. And that transit helps get people there. Our driver that does the summer loop, which goes up to Wallowa Lake, he told us that a lot of locals don't know this bus exists, except Steven, he will tell you. But that he drives people from other countries all the time on that bus because Germans come here and they assume that you would take the bus to go to, you know, a wonderful wonder of the world. And this is my own personal pitch. There's currently no way to get to Crater Lake by bus, and I would like someone to remedy that for me. Because you can get to Klamath Falls on the train. There's no taxi to pick you up, but you know, you can get to Klamath Falls on the train. There used to be a bus. It has not existed since COVID, so there's my business idea for someone. This was from Jim, who I actually ended up calling back and having a great conversation with him, and he said, "Stop requested was the news I can use." Come on.
This is Jim from Vancouver. As a totally blind senior citizen, I'm interested in finding out how I could go from the Vancouver area to Astoria to then get to Warrenton to go to the beach.
He knows how to get to the beach now. But I feel like this perfectly illustrates, in addition to being he's been blind his whole life, he's a super seasoned transit rider, but he didn't know there was a bus that leaves from the Amtrak station to take him to the beach like twice a day. And he said, "Oh, my daughter used to drive me, but she has a job now and she doesn't have time to like drive her dad to the beach in the middle of a work day." And he has since taken it. I chatted with him, so. All right, so to introduce now, I'm gonna bring up Evan Howington, who's my old boss. This is very fun. So Evan is a master's student at Portland State Urban and Regional Planning, and prior to working with TREC, I worked with him at Trillium Transit and Optibus, supporting transit agencies in getting all of their data into Google Maps. And probably most important is that he grows chili peppers to make hot sauce. Does this take you back to our old job?
It truly does. And fortunately, you answered all the questions I prepared. So this is just going to be uncensored reminiscing, which I feel like most radios and podcasts are now.
Yeah, that is true.
Well, yeah, so actually a few days ago, Lillian did ask me if I could recall any of some of our adventures trying to find bus stops on Google Maps and on Google Earth and Street View. And there was a few that we had to hunt down, especially in Eastern Oregon, because as you probably recall, a lot of that, the information we get from agencies would be, how would you describe the information we get from agencies?
Is it information? They often are just like, yeah, we run the bus, and we're like, where does the bus go? When does it stop? And they're like, it goes on Mondays.
Yeah. When I would onboard new people to do this work, and a bunch of them are over here, the hardworking folks who have put all of this data into Google Maps. And Lillian, I think how I described it is, I would assume that most of these agencies, they just open the garage, the buses just leave, and then at night the buses just come back and they close the door.
They're sort of like homing pigeons.
Yeah, exactly.
So this one I thought was interesting. Prac Rudy, do you recognize this? So Evan, recreate how we try to find a bus stop.
So in this case, this is the bus that goes between Ontario, which, does anybody know here, Ontario is a city in Eastern Oregon that is in Mountain Standard Time, which means when you get to Druzy, you get to go back in time. Your bus leaves the preceding stop at 11:30, and you get into Druzy at a cool 10:50. But as you can see, Druzy is not on the highway, yet the bus is on the highway. And so basically the Druzy bus stop, which is how it's described on a PDF, it just says Druzy, and it'll be there about 10:50, which again, back in time. And yeah, that's the park and ride. So the next time you complain about a park and ride not having sufficient parking and being full, well, there's lots of parking in Druzy.
I'd also like to note the parking is free.
It is free, there's no time limit.
Yeah, that's part of that fast, frequent, cheap
Yeah.
triangle. So that was so much of our jobs was just going down Google Earth and trying to find something that looked like a place a bus could possibly pull over. We did not pick anybody up in Druzy on the way out. There's spectacular sunsets on this part of the route. But this route is the point bus.
Yes. So one of the really cool things about the state of Oregon is that if you listen to Stop Requested, you probably heard about the Flix bus, the one that kind of maybe possibly sometimes would let you like duck and roll off the bus in Baker City. So Greyhound used to operate intercity buses in the state of Oregon in collaboration with Amtrak, and then Flixbus, a European conglomerate, bought Greyhound. And Oregon has...
But they didn't buy any of the bus stops.
They didn't buy any of the bus
Which is part
stops.
of the problem.
And the state of Oregon actually has its own series of 5 different buses that are kind of sewing together the fabric of the state, the point buses. And one of those buses goes between Bend and Ontario, another one between Portland and Astoria. And so if you wanted to get to Ontario in another time zone, you can take a point bus, which is helps funded by the state of Oregon and supported so that we have these vital links connecting parts of our state that otherwise would not have any operator.
Well, and currently now the point bus, there's hope that this will change because the Flixbus as of January no longer exists on the I-84 corridor. So now there is no way to get to Portland from Ontario, Baker City. Once you get to LeGrand, you can then hop on a bus that will take you to Pendleton, then hop on a bus that will take you up to Walla Walla, then from Walla Walla to Pasco, then you can take the part of the Greyhound that still exists from Pasco to Portland, which now requires an overnight, right? So it's like, it's not practical unless you live in LeGrand and you have the entirety of the day to go into Portland. And I will also say that if you live in Pendleton, the federal government subsidizes to the tune of about $200 a seat a flight from Pendleton to the Portland International Airport for $50, which is less than the Greyhound cost between the two. And now there is no Greyhound, so.
Yeah, that is, it's under the Essential Air Service, which is what is doing that.
Yeah, and it's only by 3 miles that they qualify for the essential air services. It came down to where they measured what part of the airport, because for essential air service support, you need to be able to demonstrate that you're over a certain number of miles from a airport, from like a regional airport that has connections. And originally they were measuring to the outside of the PDX gate from Pendleton. That was 2.7 miles too short to qualify for the EAS money. So instead what they did is they measured from the center of the urban growth boundary of Pendleton and all the way into the center of the Portland airport, and then they were able to get it.
The best cartographers at work. So thinking about, a lot of what you've shared tonight is about how transit is really the intersection of a lot of these things around healthcare, economics, and right now there was just a story this morning on OPB about the current negotiations over funding and what's called STIF funding. Transit people love really bad sounding acronyms.
I will say that my boss let me keep, we need to stiff in the...
Well, and this was fun throwback is the number of municipalities that have, say, like Santa Clarita, so you have SC, and then most transit agencies are the area transit. And so when you end up coming up with your acronyms, a lot of agencies have to get creative with what they call themselves. But
How many agencies do you think are called CAT?
there are dozens of CATs across. So if you want to find a CAT bus, there are so many, and including, who knows where the CAT bus is in the state of Oregon? The Gorge, yes,
Yeah.
Columbia Area Transit, yes. But tell us a little bit about STIF funding, since it's very relevant to this day.
Yeah, thanks, because I just did this piece, so I feel like I remember all of my information about it. So STIF is a payroll tax that we pay in Oregon, and it's meant to fund transportation, but it is primarily directed at public transit. It is a 0.01% payroll tax currently, but there's kind of two camps right now in the legislature. TriMet has raised this sort of alarm saying that they are going to have to cut 2/3 of services over the next decade. So they'll be down to like 5 buses or something. I don't know. I think it's like 23 buses actually out of their current 78. If they don't get an increase in STIF funding. But rural agencies rely on it even more than TriMet does. TriMet has what's called fare box recovery, which means that like we pay money to ride TriMet, right? Like it's not free for most of us. And if you do get it free, you probably are getting it subsidized by your employer or someone else that's paying in for you. Portland State University, perhaps. And TriMet has like other sources of funding. Rural agencies are heavily dependent on STIF, and one of the cool things that it funds in Oregon is it funds these point buses. The whole goal is to operate buses in rural areas where it would not be feasible for a private operator to run. Like Greyhound clearly decided it was not worth their money to run, between Boise, Ontario, Baker City, LeGrand, and Pendleton on that corridor, but there's no way into Baker City now. Like you can't get in there from Ontario. And a lot of people in Ontario access healthcare in Boise because that's the nearest big city. And now there is no transit method there. So you just have to hitch a ride with someone.
Yeah. So lighten it up a little bit. Nicest bus.
Nicest bus. Okay, I wish I had a picture of it. I think it's actually the lead picture on the STIF story. So if you go to opb.org, hit the red contribute now button while you're there. But if you go to opb.org, you'll see it if you look up the STIF story. But LeGrand has these buses that are in like trolley drag. Ooh. So they look like vintage trolleys, but they're just regular public buses. But they put them in like, in Eastern Oregon University, like parades, they'll like go around town, and they dress it up for Spooky Trolley on Halloween. And they did let me ring the bell, and it does sound like an old streetcar bell. It has like wooden benches in it and everything. It's like fully in drag. It's like tucked and everything. Oh my God. I'm gonna get fired after this, aren't I?
Sorry, it was the wooden benches. So I listened to Stop Requested, and you mentioned that there was Judge Judy. Can you remind us about Judge Judy?
I have a picture of Judge Judy. It's very important. We have cat pictures. This is the first cat picture.
I can relate. I had the experience of getting a flat tire on a planned trip to the coast, and had the experience of how am I going to get to the coast? And I knew from working at Trillium, I was like, I could take the wave. I could, if I just got to Tanasbourne, then I could take the wave to Tillamook, and then from Tillamook I could get to Manzanita. And I will say, on that bus, there were multiple animals. And so I am actually shocked. This was the only one you encountered, right?
Yeah, okay, so Prac Rudy was determined to pet a coyote on this trip. And I wanted to bring her back to our employer in one piece. But I will tell you that Linda from Lakeview and Josh, who is our bus driver from Lakeview up to Christmas Valley, they were really trying to help Prec Rudy find a coyote. Because Josh is an astrophotographer, so they took us out to like go, they were like, oh, we have dark skies, they're so amazing. Like people from all over the world come to Lakeview to like view our like incredible dark skies, and it was like totally overcast the day that we were there. And we were like, it's so pretty. And they were like, this is not the sky we were trying to show you. But we sadly did not see a single coyote, which I think is probably safer for everyone's limbs. But there were many animals at where Judge Judy lives, which is called the Animal House. It's on the main drag of Lakeview. It's this house that just has a giant sign, like hand-painted sign on it that says Animal House. And the person, Rhonda Dials, who runs it, there is no shelter, there is no animal control in Lake County. And so Rhonda Dials, she said God told her that it was her job to open this. She had like a family tragedy where she lost her daughter to addiction, and God walked in her in the hospital and said, you're gonna open an animal rescue. And she did. And the animal rescue is sort of just her house that has been taken over by all the animals, which is why it is called Animal House. But Judge Judy here checks everyone in and out of the house. And she approached us, she scouted us. Judge Judy was like, hey, I got a story for you. You should come talk. I'm reception.
Well, something that I realized I probably should have started with, but you know, I think with all transit, especially buses that are going in a loop, is it's just going to take you back eventually to where you started. Is where does your passion for transit come from? Like, what is the seed, the germinating point for transit in your life?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I think that contrary to what I was referencing earlier, where people don't like the public, I think I do like the public. I think my favorite part of transit is always just getting to talk to people. I think that was the hardest part about like COVID is I would ride the Max and I would be the only person on like a 2-person Max sometimes, and I would like a 2-car Max, and I'd be like, okay, cool. I'm getting a personal train to Beaverton, which is a cool feeling, but you know, probably won't math out long term for TriMet, which we are now seeing the results of. I also like I've never owned a car. I've lived in Oregon for 18 years, and when I first lived here, I lived in rural Lane County, and if you don't have a car in rural Lane County, you are so dependent on rides from other people. But there is one bus. It comes 3 times a day, goes between Lowell and Eugene, and Dexter, where I lived, is not even that far outside of Eugene. It's about 18 miles. 18 miles is a heck of a long walk, though. And I don't know if you've ever been on Highway 58. It's not a fun biking highway. It's a logging highway, so, you know, even if it's got a wide shoulder, you're going to be constantly passed by logging trucks. And so I think I only biked from Dexter to Eugene once, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to take the bus now. Anyway, I just think that there are so many possibilities in transit and so many ways to experience the city and the country, and that you just can't experience from inside a car. You don't get the same. It takes you into the middle of town. That's what I love. If you fly somewhere, you know, you're out in an airport. Once I flew into an airport in Rome. I swear it was 5 hours away from actual Rome. I took a very cheap flight. This is when I lived in Berlin. And the entire time I was with a bunch of Italian teenagers singing football songs the entire way. But you're just not in the middle of the urban center. If you take transit, you get taken to where people want to go, as long as the transit system is well designed.
Yeah, no, the number of, and you know, when we looking at LeGrand there, like part of the reason the bus goes everywhere is that a lot of it is about serving senior citizens, serving people who can't necessarily walk that 2, 3, 4 blocks to a bus that might have a more direct route. And honestly, at that point, you can just get on the bus and it will eventually take you to wherever you need to go, simply because it goes everywhere.
I definitely, when we first started this trip, we started in the Dalles, and we had called the day before to get the deviated fixed route, because they would pick you up, like, you know, they'll pick you up within, I think 0.5 miles, I think it is, of the route. And we called them, we were like, hey, we're at this hotel. It's the Dells. Everybody knows what hotel is which, right? They were like, oh, I love the breakfast there. And I was still thinking like a city transit rider, because I called them like 3 times. I was like, hey, the bus was supposed to be here like 10 minutes ago. Where is it? Because I was worried if we missed that bus, we were going to miss like all of the connections. But I forgot that the Columbia Gorge Express and the Hood River Link, they are all extremely coordinated. So they actually, even though they're different transit agencies, they know if the other bus via dispatch is on the way. So they were like, oh, we're not gonna leave you in Hood River. Like the bus will be there, they're gonna wait for you. And that's the kind of thing that's that flexibility that you get when you kind of give up that frequency or the cheapness, one or the other.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I think a lot of people don't understand is that once you go outside main cities in Oregon, like Eugene, Salem, and Portland, that most of these agencies they're county-wide. They'll be run by the county. And so really there's like a handoff that has to happen maybe at the next town beyond the border. And, you know, if you want to make that connection, then you got to make sure that the next bus is there. Who do you think is doing the best job in the state in terms of that coordination?
Oh, I'm going to tell you who's doing the worst first.
Oh, no.
And it's okay, I'm not throwing any of my friends under this, because who I'm throwing under the bus, is Greyhound Flixbus, and they're not here anymore. So the only way that I was able to figure out like why Baker City had disappeared, because I was like, oh, I know I can take it through Baker City. Like the bus starts in Ontario for Greyhound and it ends in Pendleton. There's only one highway between the two. Like Baker City is on the way, and it had disappeared off the list. And the only way that I was able to get any information, I tried calling Greyhound, I tried the website, absolutely hopeless. What I ended up doing was calling Community Connections of Northeast Oregon, which coordinates 3 counties worth of transit agencies. And I said, hey, the Greyhound stops at your transit hub, right? Like, do you know, like, is it not going to Baker City anymore? Like, how do I get there? And he's like, it'll be here in 2 hours. I'll give you a call back. And Patrick just talked to the driver when the Greyhound came through, and she said, we'll let you off, but you have to officially book it into Legrand, and then you can sneak off the bus in Baker City, which is like not a great system. Right? And then one of the problems that they were having before they finally totally discontinued the route, but they were just canceling it on no notice. And what was happening is that Community Connections of Northeast Oregon coordinates all of these like once or twice a week connectors so that people can get in for the Greyhound, because people need to go to Portland to fly out or to go to medical or to visit family or like any of the number of things that we have here in Portland. And then the problem was if you took the 3 times a week bus from Enterprise into LeGrand and then the Greyhound got canceled, you have to either find a place to stay in LeGrand, you have to call a friend to drive 120 miles round trip to take you back to Enterprise, and that was like a situation a lot of people ran into. Now, who's doing a good job? Northwest Connector. And I actually have a picture of their website. Okay, so this is Northwest Connector, and these are, as you can tell, 5 different transit agencies. These are all public agencies, and they have this like coordinated website between all of them. All of the headways link up. So you can go from the very top of Oregon down to the bottom of Oregon in 2 days on public transit, like straight all the way away, because they have coordinated every single headway, so you've got like the right amount of time to stop. The drivers all know each other, and it is that you can even use one pass on all 3 of the top agencies, and you can get inland as well. So they operate 3 inland buses. One of them is not on here anymore because it's now operated by the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde. It is the bus that goes from Lincoln City to Salem, which a lot of people need. There's a lot of people who live in Salem who own like vacation homes in Lincoln City, or they just want to go gamble. And but that bus that the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde got to take people was actually just an old bus owned by Benton Area Transit, I believe, No, it was owned by Lincoln County Transit, and they just were able to give it over to the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde to keep operating that because they were short on drivers. So, because the driver retired, it keeps happening.
Yeah, and this has been something that's been happening nationwide, is this shortage of drivers. I mean, I'm sure you've seen here in Portland that every TriMet bus is letting you know that they are hiring and that you can get a $7,500 bonus if you want to go.
It does come over like 2 years, though. That bonus is not all at once. But I will say, this is my...
I'm graduating, and that's my next jump.
Evan is looking for a job, by the way, so... what I will say is that TriMet's Director of Communications did tell me last week they are finally through their operator shortage. So that's great news. Maybe less MAX trains will be canceled due to operator shortage. But they do need money, is what they said, so...
Oh, keeping it stiff. So if you had the ear of some of the folks in Salem right now that are really debating the value of some of these as they would say, getting ODOT back into the business of repairing roads and bridges, if you had the ear of some of these folks to kind of make the case for why this state is really buoyed by public transit, what would you want them to hear?
Here's what I'll say. I'm not going to advocate for any particular thing because I am a journalist. What I will say is that rural transit is important, and I absolutely know that. How you fund it is a matter for lawmakers, and I will tell you that all the lawmakers have asked me to have their constituents contact them and tell them what they care about when it comes to public transit. This is not a luxury. It's not just for tourists. It's not just for city people. This is an essential service. And it serves the most vulnerable people in the state. It serves people that are too old to drive safely on their own. It solves a lot of things that we have no really good solutions for: isolation, medical, healthcare deserts, which a lot of our rural parts of our state have. There's no pharmacy in like 3 or 4 county area of northeastern Oregon anymore, which is a different rant. But I think people do not realize how important this is to economic opportunity and to fixing some of the cost of living issues. That for every, imagine if you're a city person, I'm assuming most of you live in the city. Imagine that if you had to buy all of your groceries at the smallest bodega in your neighborhood, right? If you were not able to go do a big shop and go to, your Fred Meyer, your Safeway, whatever, and actually get the reasonably priced groceries, and you had to spend $12 or whatever it is for every pint of milk, that, for a lot of people in rural Oregon, that is what they are faced with when they go to their local grocery store. Extremely limited selection, as we all know, where you're like, when was the last time you purchased these cookies in this? You're like, I think those cookies might be old enough to vote. And they're $9 a pack. And I just want people to understand that it is not a luxury, it is essential. And I don't think they realize that the vast majority of transit agencies in the state serve rural areas. Everybody thinks that this is all about TriMet. It is not all about TriMet. TriMet is important. I love TriMet. I take TriMet. I would like it to continue to have good services. But most people in this state are served by an agency other than TriMet. And it is important for people to understand that. So, should we do Q&A? Do you have any other burning questions?
Well, I think, as you said at the top here, this is really about getting into some of the weeds and getting into the nerdery, and I see some nerds. So I know.
I see some personal nerds here. Okay, it looks like Becca has the mic here. So raise your hand, and someone will figure out who's coming around.
Like a good bus driver, she will figure it out in her head the fastest route.
Thank you for giving this seminar. First of all, out of curiosity, if we wanted to manage our prices in a certain way, what do you think would be the possibility of having unmanned people movers, kind of connecting inner cities around Oregon that are kind of elevated, non-manned rails that, a lot of folks probably need to get a ride to these different stations, but would otherwise be a good intercity, connection for folks. Do you think that would be an opportunity for people, or
Ooh, I think
is
that's
like the
above
bus
my,
the most like efficient form?
I think that's above my pay grade. I feel like Evan is chomping at the bit to answer this question.
I mean, it is certainly the du jour topic for transportation research right now is about the ways in which automation completely upends or just continues to reify existing systems. But one of the greatest opportunities that keeps surfacing about automation is in low density areas. It doesn't necessarily make as much sense to try to automate everyone's vehicle in a dense city, but it may make sense for automation to be able to serve, say, Klamath Falls at midnight when the bus comes, that no, the Uber driver's not, or the train. And so I know that a lot of research is being done right now about the way that automation could potentially be leveraged in rural areas in particular because of the way that those services would be much better suited to fill the niche where there isn't a bus, there isn't a driver, there's not a human being awake at that hour.
One thing that was really surprising to me that I didn't really think about was, so in Lakeview, they got a 4-seater electric vehicle because a lot of their things, they have like a big bus with a lift and everything, but a lot of they're just driving one person to a medical appointment, so they have this little 4-seater electric vehicle that works if you're not in a wheelchair. And they said they have a huge problem with electric vehicles there because their electricity grid is so inconsistent in Lake County, and their weather is so extreme. So they don't have a place to keep the vehicle inside, and
the picture made that obvious.
Yeah. And they just had a lot of, Lakeview has very extreme weather. It's in the shadow of a mountain. It's almost a mile high in elevation. It's Oregon's mile-high city. It's claim to fame. And that was a thing that was really surprising to me. I think it would definitely be practical to have theoretically automated vehicles that are transporting people to medical appointments in Portland. My question is just like, price-wise, I don't know. I don't know if that parses out, but I hope someone solves it. I want my robot driver to take me to the coast. That sounds great. It sounds very expensive. I will also say that 40 trains a day go through Baker City, and none of them have been passenger rail since 1997. So, we could have rail already in Baker City with existing right-of-ways, and we don't. So, get that first.
You are named the co-leaders of a $5 billion transit budget for the state of Oregon.
This is a very Michael Anderson question.
Yeah. So congratulations. The consultant comes to you and says, okay, but you need to choose a number on the spectrum between ridership and coverage. What is the percentage point that you choose for the ridership coverage trade-off, and why? Do you know what I mean?
Oh, I know what you mean.
So one of the things that has bedeviled a transit agency since the dawn of time is how do you balance between covering a lot of area, like the bus that just circles all of the Grand, versus being able to really build ridership by being able to offer direct, frequent service. And so balancing that is really hard. It gets back to Lillian's triangle that if you want to try to do any number of these 3 things, you got to really only pick 2. And so between ridership and coverage, you got quite a bit of money here. But we have a very large state.
Yeah. Is this theoretical transit agency in Oregon? It's the entire state of Oregon. And you only gave me $5 billion? Okay, fine. That's really hard. Can I choose in the middle? I mean, I think coverage area-wise, I would focus on the I-5 corridor, and I know that's a very Portlander, Willamette Valley thing to say, but I will say there is a huge need for transit in the southern part of the I-5 corridor. Pretty much once you get past Eugene, you are SOL. And, we had, when we were coming back from John Day to Bend, we were on the 3 times a week Grant County People Mover bus, very sweet folks. And one of the people on the bus with us was a firefighter, and he had been out on fire. It was, last year was one of the worst fire seasons in the state of Oregon's history. He had a family emergency in Grants Pass, and he needed to be able to get back home. He said he'd never been on a bus in his life. He got adopted by an 82-year-old woman on the bus who was very experienced with the bus, and she gave him all the need to know. But we were trying to figure out how to get him back to Grants Pass because he just genuinely didn't know. And that was like, they just gave him some money at the fire site and then had him like haul all of his firefighting equipment. Or like, I don't know, get back to Grants Pass. And even if we had tried to substitute in air service, like we were like, could you get to Bend and then fly? And then you'd have to fly into Medford and then you'd have to, like, all of those options, it still was going to require an overnight or 2 overnights to get him back to Grants Pass, and that distance is not that far. So my answer is that I would spend all $5 billion in the I-5 corridor coverage region, and I'm very sorry to Eastern Oregon. I feel like this is very typical of me. I have to think more thoroughly about this. This might not be my best plan.
Hi there. I heard you comment a little bit about transportation and the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde. Are you able to share more about that service or how providers are serving tribal communities in Oregon?
I could talk a little bit about it. I think 6 or 7 of our transit agencies in Oregon are operated by tribal entities. Sometimes they're confederated tribes, sometimes they're a single tribe or a band of a tribe. Most of what they end up doing is serving the need within their own communities. So it'll be like between the Longhouse, between the university, between the town center. There's only a couple that receive some money from STIF, as we mentioned, or sometimes some federal money. They have to be a tribe that has federal recognition. Not all tribes have been restored federal recognition, and in which case they don't get access to those federal funds. And so anyway, some of them will have numbered routes. Some of them will have routes that they don't want that information to be public and will only serve members of their community. But once they accept federal funds or STIF funds, usually it has to be open and accessible to everyone because that's the definition of public transit when it comes to funding. Evan, you have more to say on there? Because we've both worked with a lot of tribal agencies.
Well, you bring up an interesting point, because one of the things that we would encounter a lot when we would want to put information on apps like Google Maps is we had agencies that didn't want that information
They want to be secret buses.
Well, and a lot of times it was the fear that the demand would overwhelm them, that if people knew there were these buses like the one in Christmas Valley, that all of a sudden these services that don't have necessarily the drivers or the resources might be inundated with requests for services. And so we encountered lots of agencies that were like, no, we don't want anyone to see that.
I like my favorite names for them. So Kayak is one of the really big transit agencies operated by a tribe. That's in the Pendleton area. Pendleton, as a city, also has its own bus, which is called the Letter Bus. Letter Bus. Yep. I will say our colleague Antonio Sierra, who's been out there for I think 16 or 17 years, and he was like, when we moved out here, he moved from LA, so he was used to, having transit. There was nothing, and he's like, I can't believe we now have 3 transit agencies that serve Pendleton, but they have Grant County People Mover, the Letter Bus, which is operated by Pendleton, and I think it's a joint project with Umatilla County, if I'm right, and then the Kayak, which is named for the kayak, which is the traditional mode of transportation for them.
The original bus. Yeah. We're done.
Okay. Is it last one or second last one? It is 7. Okay. Oh, it's 7. We're getting kicked. Okay, we're doing one more?
Yeah.
Okay.
I feel so much pressure. So just a follow-up to Michael Anderson's, because I wasn't asked. I deeply believe in if you build it, they will come. So I think your answer of the I-5 is a really beautiful way to cap the story because you celebrated how rural is making it happen for their people. And I think that if anything happened in a large scale on the I-5, those rural communities would make sure that their people can get there and could be served by that. So just kind of close that one out. I was like, I think that that is the perfect answer, even though you were a little bit disparaging to yourself. My actual question, though, is what's the next route? Where's Stop Requested going next?
Oh, I have some ideas. I thought it would be fun to do A to Z. So from Astoria to Zeller, Washington. I haven't actually figured out if it's possible yet. I have to make more spreadsheets. We have this thing called the Northwest News Network, which is a coordinating network that we work with all these different radio stations and journalism outlets. And I think it would be so cool to have a local reporter join me on the bus in their town and kind of like chain it together. And so I was thinking maybe like I start in Seattle and try to go down through Washington, Portland to Bend. A lot of people were extremely upset that I didn't go to Salem. I will say it was about rural transit, and Salem is not rural. But I see you, I recognize you, and I really appreciate Chariots, and I love that it has weekend service now, so, you know.
As a proud supporter of KMUN out in Astoria, Oregon, I would love to connect you to any and all of that. And also, thank you so much for including the pieces of the Youngs Bay Bridge in Warrenton. I think it is the point, serving our community where I live out there. Is one of the things that I wish I had known when I lived in the Portland metro area. I did not realize that that is a beautiful bus ride to and from the coast, and it is one of my most favorite things to talk about in living in a rural community that connects to Portland. So thank you so much for including that.
Oh, yes, it was a lovely ride. We had a 4-year-old on board who thought every single city we stopped in was Astoria. And he would go, Astoria, Astoria! And then he said it so many times that by the time that we got to Astoria, all the adults in the bus were like, no, it really is Astoria now! She tried to be like, when you see the seagulls, we'll be in Astoria. Thank you all for coming. I think Brock's is...
That's a true story. And then when we got out, we immediately went, Astoria, we're in Astoria. Well, thank you so much for being here tonight. Please take our survey before you leave. It helps us continue to provide what you want and need. We have a big gift basket for one lucky winner or one lucky person who submits a survey. Thank you so much once again. Have a great night.